Thank you all for coming out here. Just to give you sort of a rundown of how this is going, I'll have some opening remarks for you, and then we have a whole bunch of PSA videos that QACTV has put together with a lot of questions, frequently asked questions we get about the development process. What is the Planning Commission? What's the Board of Appeals? What's zoning? Those things. We're hoping to answer all those questions. So after we go through all that process, as you'll see around the room, we have tables set up from all the different county agencies that have a role and things to do with development. We got stormwater management, we got planning and zoning. So at that point in time, you'll be able to go to the table that has the specific question that you might have. The commissioners will all be up here. You can come and ask us questions as well. So we're hoping to facilitate so that everybody can get all the answers that they want to do and ask all the questions they want to ask. Okay? So we're going to get started. All right, so picture this. It's a Saturday morning, and you're driving down a back road past a big, beautiful farm. And then you see this sign. You go onto Facebook, and the social media rumors are already starting to swirl. Is it a new home? Is it a strip mall? And your first thought is probably, why? We don't need this. We don't want this. Unless it's a Trader Joe's or a movie theater, maybe we want that. And I get it. I've lived here for 4 decades. And I'm one of those people who says, back in my day, we had traffic lights on Route 50. That's how long that I've been here. And I've seen a lot of change, and I felt the same apprehension that a lot of you do. You sit in traffic in the summer, and you feel like our little quiet corner of Maryland might be slipping away. But I'm going to ask you to sort of flip the coin on that now. Imagine you are that farmer that puts the for sale sign up. Your family has worked that land for generations. Before there was a Bay Bridge, before there was crushing regulations that make it harder to be a farmer. The days back when the waterman and the farmer on the Maryland seal actually meant something. But now farming has become expensive. And the regulatory burdens from Annapolis and DC feel crushing to some farmers. The next generation cannot, or maybe they just don't want to carry that weight. And that farmland isn't just scenery to them. That's their retirement fund. And unfortunately, there isn't a long line of people who want to buy it and become a farmer. That farmer isn't a villain for wanting to sell their land and to provide for their family. Nor are you for wanting to see that scenic farmland. Let me give you another scenario. You spent your lifetime building a business on Kent Island. And now your son wants to come and join you. And on your business, you have a little bit of extra land, and it's zoned for you to build 6 apartments. Your son can live in one, and you can rent the other 5 out and use that cash flow to expand your business. You apply at planning and zoning, and as soon as the sign goes up to show that you're going to build apartments, people start calling the commissioners, people who live 5 miles down the road from you, maybe they've only lived here for about 3 years, and they say, don't let them do that. We don't want it. And all of these positions, for and against, are all valid. And there's a tension between the positions of those citizens. So that's where the county, we live in that tension between these competing views. And my job, the job of the commissioners, the job of the county staff here, it's to find a way to reach a compromise on those issues. Now, there's a lot of belief that the county commissioners have this unchecked power. We can just wave a magic wand and approve or reject a development. Social media does fuel this myth, and they tell you the commissioners can just say no to everything. But tonight what we're going to do is we're going to bust those social media myths with knowledge. Because the reality is that Queen Anne's County, like any other jurisdiction, has laws all the way up to the Constitution. And ignoring those laws doesn't save our land, it endangers it. So why can't we just say no? You guys might recognize Thomas Jefferson, student of Locke, big property rights guy. He wrote into the Fifth Amendment that no person can be deprived of their property without due process of law and just compensation. Right? This is called the Takings Clause. And I think most people understand the Takings Clause in the context of if the state is building a road and they take a little sliver of land from you and they have to pay you for that and they build the road on it. But a taking doesn't have to require physical possession of the property. The Supreme Court has said that If we pass laws that restrict your property too much, that can also be a taking. So even if you still hold the deed, those regulations can destroy the value. And if that happens, the Constitution says the government has to pay. So imagine you buy a new car, and that's your property. And then the government says you can't put gas in it. And you can't charge the battery. Don't put your key in that ignition and take the tires off. You still own that car. But the regulations have taken away all the value. It is now useless. According to the Supreme Court, the same thing happens with overregulated property. It's a taking. You can go to court for compensation, and that means you, the taxpayers, pay for that. But the Supreme Court has also said that we could place reasonable restrictions on properties. You know this is zoning, right? Zoning is what says that we can't put a nuclear power plant next to a house, we can't put a strip club next to a school, right? Dan Harding, he'll have to do his night job somewhere else. Right? So courts will review zoning actions under sort of what's called an arbitrary and capricious standard. So what does that mean? That means you put some thought process behind the comprehensive zoning you were doing, or were you sort of like a spoiled kid that sort of made the rules up, and then when you didn't like how it was going, you changed the rules? That's not enforceable. Another issue is rigid zoning, right? That is also not enforceable. So zoning has some safety valves built in. We have variances, we have appeals, we have conditional uses. And these let there be flexibility when practicality demands it. Before the Bay Bridge, Queen Anne's County did not have zoning. It was the Wild West, right? The first permanent zoning and subdivision law was enacted in 1965. It was not that long ago. But by that time, a developer named David Nichols had already platted 5 major subdivisions on Ken Island. Ken Island Estates, Bay City, Cloverfields, Roman Coke on the Bay, and Harborview. Between 1950 and 1960, the population on Ken Island increased by 40%. Homes in these neighborhoods that were platted in the 1950s are still being built today. But the county, because it didn't have professional zoning and professional staff in zoning back then, these legally buildable lots were created without any of the requirements that we would impose today. It's left us with a legacy of bad roads, issues with stormwater management, and bay pollution. Many of those communities would never be allowed to be created today. And it wasn't until the 1970s, believe it or not, that the county first hired its professional staff for planning and zoning and public works. Again, not that long ago. And at that time, they came up with the Staff Technical Advisory Committee called STAC. It was an old Army guy who was in charge of zoning, and he liked that, the way that sounded. And so what STAC is it's the staff, the technical staff, will review plans before it even goes to the Planning Commission. We still have STAC today. And this is where the staff will help people, small businesses who are looking to open up a shop. How do they go through the process? But it's also part of the process where a lot of really bad ideas are put to rest. And you don't hear about it because there's no publicity that surrounds that. Now, while we don't have public comment at STAC meetings, they are public meetings, and so everybody is allowed to go to them, and you can learn a lot. And it's very early in the process. There's a lot of information you can learn. So let's talk about state law now. Oh, I missed that. So, state law. And see that for those of you who don't know, there's the farmer and the waterman on the state seal. That used to be what drove Maryland. It's changed a little bit, and we see that in the regulations on how watermen and farmers are treated. In the 1990s, Maryland introduced smart growth policies. Right? This is directed development towards existing communities. And then in 2012, under the O'Malley administration, we had the septic bill. Basically, that made major subdivisions on septic a thing of the past. You have to do it when there's a wastewater treatment facility. So what did that do? These laws push development to where the infrastructure is, and that's right here. In Queen Anne's County, Ken Island is the only place outside of the incorporated towns where we have a wastewater treatment facility. So when people ask you, why is all the growth seem to be on Ken Island? That is a big part of the why. State law has directed it here. But there's more. The state requires us to have a comprehensive plan. This is our 10-year vision for the county. Ours is about 450 pages. We last did it in 2022 after more than a year of public input. It's a huge, huge undertaking. And including in the comp plan is addressing things like the 8 visions from the state's 1992 Planning Act. So one of which is development should be concentrated. We must designate and manage growth in specific areas, they call priority funding areas. So it's no wonder that when a developer is looking to build something, they look to the growth areas that have been established in the comp plan that we're required to develop by state law. And then the state requires us annually to report on how the comp plan is going. And that's what planning and zoning does. We also have a comprehensive water and sewer plan. It's about 350 pages. Has to be reviewed by the Maryland Department of Environment and the Maryland Department of Planning. Again, more state mandates that we have to follow. The county cannot choose to ignore these state mandates. So people sometimes will ask, well, but when the developer comes in, why don't they have to pay for any of the impact that they have in the county? Truth is, they do. We have an adequate public facility ordinance. Developers, and this addresses things like roads, school, water, and sewer. So think of the APFO as like a circuit breaker in your house. Your county infrastructure, the schools, the roads, and the sewers, this is in the electric panel. And you can run the lights and you can run the fridge just fine, but if you put in that brand new appliance like a 250 unit subdivision, you could blow a fuse. The APFO is that safety switch. It asks, what is the capacity of the roads? What are the capacity of the schools? And if the system is overloaded, the breaker will trip. The development stops. The developer has to wait until those infrastructure is there, or they have to pay for that infrastructure themselves. And Queen Anne's County actually has a lot stricter requirements than many other areas in Maryland. We have a stricter requirement for roads, and we have a stricter requirement for schools. Our school capacity is rated 100%. There are jurisdictions that will let you overcrowd schools to 120% before they worry about the impact. Now, the impact charges that the developers have to pay have to be reasonable, or they'll be unenforceable. We can't say you have to pay $100,000 for every student that you enter in. That would be unenforceable, and then you're going to get nothing from the court. So there's a lot of process that goes into making sure they're going to be enforceable. In addition to the APFO, there are huge costs associated with doing development. Civil engineers, lawyers, environmental experts, traffic engineers, architects, the list goes on. I recently heard from somebody that they spent $60,000 just to get the concept plan review for a lot that was just a couple thousand square feet. Now think about the effects of those costs on trying to create affordable housing with all of those costs built in. How do you make a house that's affordable? Or think about those costs when it comes to a small business. If you're a chain restaurant, you got lawyers, you got engineers, you got deep pockets. You don't really mind so much the regulations. They're annoying, but you can overcome them and you can open up. You're a mom and pop shop and you want to open up a coffee shop. Can you spend $150,000 to go through this review process and then go to the planning commission and someone says, we don't want it, before you've even opened your doors? That's a huge risk, and that impacts a lot of small businesses from starting. And we do, Heather Tonelli, our Director of Economic Development back there, she works really hard to help small businesses open and to streamline things for them. And importantly, we cannot arbitrarily change the rules or ignore the law just because people are yelling on Facebook. And I'm not speaking in hypotheticals here, right? Let me tell you about Bay Bridge Cove. Anybody here who live in Bay Bridge Cove? All right, love you all. This is not an attack on anybody who lives in Bay Bridge Cove. I just want you to know that. But it's a story of how the process came to be that it's worth telling, because I don't think a lot of people know this. So before I was a commissioner, and Bay Bridge Cove was coming up. That's not actually what was there, but it kind of looked like this. I wasn't in favor of this development. And I'll tell you why. Because to me, that was the Price Farm. And my friend lived there. And in high school, every weekend of my junior and senior year was on that farm. And in the summer, we would pick corn and then sell it on the side of Route 8, whatever Terry would let us pick and sell. And so I was devastated to know that that was gone. It's a piece of your childhood history that's being torn away. And there were others in the community who also said, we don't want it. And a lot of people who fought hard. I know Jay Fawcett was here. He helped Terry fight that for a while. And so the people went to the commissioners, and the commissioners said no to the sewer allocation. No, we're not going to let that go forward. So the developer went to court, and he won. And then the planning commission said no. And the developer went to court, and the judge, Mumford, found the planning commission in contempt of court. That development went forward. And I'm going to tell you, there is no doubt that there are some fights that are worth fighting, even if you're going to lose. And maybe this was one of them. However, because of the laws concerning development, some of which I've already discussed, we can predict some of these outcomes. And the county cannot afford to turn every legitimate development into litigation that we're going to lose. That is the taxpayers' money going to lawyers that could go to parks and teachers and ambulances. But we can use the process to mitigate. We can reduce densities. We can request public open space. We can get developer contributions to public works projects. So let's talk about a lesson learned from a recent proposal. Everybody remember the Dunkin' Donuts on Cox Neck Road? So here, I want to discuss something that I think can help you make your voices more powerful when you're speaking. Whether you're for or against the project, because I'm not taking any position. There are always valid points on both sides of something. And I call this speaking to the issue. And here's what I mean. When the government boards vote on something, they have a specific question that they have to vote on. And if you're speaking about another question, no matter how passionately you speak about that, it won't matter because that's not what they're there to vote on. You have to match your concerns to what is actually on the table for a vote. When Dunkin' Donuts came by, many people said, don't let Dunkin' Donuts go there. And I feel that frustration. But let's look at what the Planning Commission was actually voting on. It was to reduce parking spaces and combine 3 lots. The question before the Planning Commission wasn't, should a Dunkin' Donuts be allowed to go in that location? Because, as noted, that decision was made decades and decades ago. That's zoning, right? So a long, long time ago, that site was designated as an area where you could put a fast food restaurant. That makes sense why the guy from Dunkin' Donuts thought he could go there, because he hired a real estate agent and said, what property is zoned for a fast food restaurant? And that's where they go to look. And it's important that you have zoning in place. Think about if your house is zoned for residential. What if when you put up for sale, your neighbors said, we don't need that to be a house anymore? And they asked the commissioners to change the zoning so it's not residential anymore. Your house has got no value now. So it's important that you have zoning in place and that it is followed. So the people just said, no, we don't want Dunkin' Donuts. That's not something that the Planning Commission could have acted on. But here's the good news for those who didn't like that idea of the Dunkin' Donuts. There was a large group of residents that did the right thing. They talked about the safety concerns. They talked about the high volume drive-through, more traffic, more accidents, dangerous turns. Now that was something the Planning Commission could consider. Those residents spoke to the issue, and guess what? They created a hearing record that the Planning Commission could use to make their appeal supported, and a decision that if it got appealed, could probably withstand an appeal. Because when the Planning Commission votes or the County Commission votes, if someone doesn't like it, they have some options to go to court, as we've seen. And so you need a record. And the record is not created because someone posted something on Facebook. That ain't the record. You got to show up. So the lesson, know what's being asked and then answer that question. Whether you're for or against a project, that's how you make your voice count. And so while I'm on this, I'm going to get my soapbox a little bit with a pet peeve one here is we hear a lot of these things of we don't want this or we don't need that. And I get it. And I'm not saying that those feelings are not real. But here's the thing. Our laws do not allow us to reject a business because some people don't want it. And when you think about it, that's protecting you too. Let me give you an example. Years ago, nobody was standing up in meetings and saying, we need a guitar factory. We need to build specialized vehicles in Queen Anne's County. Nobody asked for that. Nobody needed that. But today, we have PRS Guitars, we have Tech Ops, and they employ hundreds of your neighbors right here in Queen Anne's County with good jobs and real paychecks. So, do we want a system with a handful of commissioners get to pick which businesses they think you need and want? Like, look at us. You probably don't want us doing those decisions. That's really not how America works, right? Like, if you don't like a business, you don't have to shop there. But your neighbor might want to shop there. Your neighbor might want to get a job there. And if nobody does, they got a business. Problem solved. That's how capitalism works, and it treats everybody fairly by the same rules. So does your voice matter? Yeah, of course it does. And Queen Anne's County has got a long, long history of making their voices matter when it comes to developments, particularly on Kent Island. So back in 1917, the U.S. Army wanted to make their weapons training facility here on Kent Island. That didn't go over too well. But the residents just stand at the shore where the bridge was going to go later and yell, no, we don't want it. They organized. They traveled to D.C. They met with the Secretary of War. And it was the Secretary of War then it became Secretary of Defense. And I guess we're going back now. But it was Secretary of War back then. And they made factual, legal, and economic arguments for why it was a terrible idea. And they won. It's the kind of engagement that works. It's not the, no, we don't want it. It's, here's why, here's the facts, here's the alternatives. That gives the governing body something that they can go with. So part of why we're here today is one, is Bill Dens kept calling me and told me I had to do it, so I did it. Is we want to explain when and how your voice can contribute to the process. So if you look up here, this is just some of the resources that you have online to learn more about what's going on in Queen Anne's County. County code, zoning code, it's all online. You want to know what countryside means? That's up there. Town center, that's up there. Self-service portal, you can look up what permits your neighbors pulled. It's on there. Comprehensive plan is online. You can sign up for email blast from the county, so you'll know when the meetings are coming. You'll be able to get to see the agenda. And we even have, if you've never used the Queen Anne's County property viewer up there with a map, that's a really cool tool. You can zoom into any property in the county. You can find out who owns it. You can also find out what is it zoned for. So when someone's saying, why is that going there? You can look in and say, oh, that's because that's zoned for a hotel. That's zoned for a restaurant. That zoning is already in place. And then when the next comprehensive zoning process comes up, you can participate in order to say, I don't think that should be zoned that way. It's changed, the neighborhood configuration changed. That doesn't make sense there anymore, but it's part of the process so that it's something that is enforceable in the law. So the next time you see that sort of fictional for sale sign on the farm, just try to remember, don't freak out. There's a real person behind it with rights and dreams, and there are laws that must be followed. There are many opportunities along the way, the process for citizens to participate. Sign up for the county email blast if you don't get them. Get the agendas, read them, show up. And if you see people who say they don't listen, it doesn't matter, it doesn't make any difference to show up, I guarantee you there are people in this room who can tell you that they have been to meetings where showing up mattered and showing up made a difference. And I'll tell you, as a commissioner, and I'm sure it's the same for people who are on the planning commission or anything else, when you look out and you see a room full of people who are very passionate in speaking to the issue, that's persuasive. People will listen. But a lot of people who tell me that we don't listen, I've never seen them. 7 years as a commissioner, never seen them at a meeting. They've never called me. They've never emailed me. And I can guarantee you this, if you reach out to any of these commissioners, you're going to get to talk to them. We are all open to everybody. So there is no, the excuses of they don't care, they don't listen, I'm on my soapbox again, but it's just not true. And I think it's a cop-out. I think it's easy for someone to say, oh, well, I don't have to participate because it's not going to matter. Show up. Make a difference. If you're for a project or you're against a project, show up. Tell us why it makes sense. Tell us why it doesn't make sense. So that's at a high level. Land use is very, very complicated. Lots of cases out there interpreting everything. So as part of this process, we also had QACTV at all the departments pull some of our frequently asked questions that we get from the public about all kinds of things with development process and real estate. And they put together some informational videos on those. They're all in little short clips. We're going to play them all now. They're also going to be available on QACTV, so if you have some friends who didn't make it, My Speech Now will be back on if you want to put yourself to endure that again. And then they can also watch the videos. And the videos are going to be in short clips. So if there's just a specific topic that they want to watch, there's a 3-minute video they can watch on. If like they're bored, Netflix isn't showing anything, they can just binge the whole thing on the weekend and do that. That's all available. After those videos are done, as I said, we have all of the tables set up from the different departments. So if you still have questions or you want to know more information, go to the table that's applicable for the questions that you have. Commissioners, raise your hands. County commissioners are here. We'll all stay here. We'll be up here. Come and ask us your questions as well. We want to make sure that you get as much information as you can, that you understand the process. If we didn't do a good job, it's Jack's fault. If you liked it, I'll take the credit for it. Thank you. We're going to play the videos now.